When my grandmother was younger, she was walking home from school. When she got to the farm that she lived on, she saw the figure of her mother out on the field, waving to her and yelling her name, beckoning her to come to her. My grandmother ran into the house to leave her backpack before going out to the field. But when she got into the kitchen, her mother was there cooking. There was no way that her mother managed to get in the house before her. Could it have been a skinwalker or a wendigo? This happened in northern Sweden, so it shouldn't be possible that it was a skinwalker, right? It was clearly her mother's voice as well, so I don't even know what to think. This happened in Arizona, of course, about 7 years ago, while we were on our biannual fishing trip to Black River, out in the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Each year, we take this little dirt road only accessible via 4x4 vehicles all the way until it ended. The only people we ever saw out there were cattle ranchers that never really went past the tree line, which was about a half-hour drive from where we camped. Needless to say, we were always way out in the boonies. There was one way in and one way out, and we camped at the very end of this road. This trip in specific was our 5th year going to the same spot. And twice a year, this would be about our 11th week-long trip at that spot. Never saw another soul outside of our party of 5, all 10 other times. We'd get up super early, sometimes a little before the sun, to get everything ready to go and fish all day, wanting to get as much fishing in as possible before it got dark. This experience happened on day 3 of 8. We were up eating some breakfast, instant oatmeal packets and protein bars for anyone curious, and getting our gear ready to go for the day. The sun wasn't up quite yet. We still had lanterns and headlamps on to see. With all of us right there, we hear footsteps coming from the road. We all look up and see 2 middle-aged Native American men walking down the road. They had no gear with them, both looking straight forward and not even acknowledging our existence. They walked straight past us up the trail along the river. We were spooked because we'd never seen anyone there in the many times we'd been. We figured they may have been camping a bit further up the road. We went down the same path a bit later, and about an hour in, we hear rustling from the other side of the river. Then, we see a fawn burst out of the trees and start running downstream. A few seconds later, 2 very mangy coyotes come sprinting out of the same spot chasing the deer down. They eventually cross back into the woods and disappear from view. Over the next 5 days, we never saw the 2 guys again. If they had had gear, I wouldn't be suspicious of this. However, to avoid us on the way back, they would have had to go extremely out of their way to get back to that road, and it really wouldn't be feasible. On top of that, the coyotes did chase that fawn back downstream where the road was. This was a recollection shared to me by my paternal aunt. This happened when she was a little girl. In the past, it wasn't uncommon for some Navajo families to be very large, 8 to 10 siblings on average. Being the youngest, she recalls that it was her and her older siblings' duty to herd the sheep to their summer camp in the mountains. The kids were sent on foot with the flock and sheepdogs. Many households had single cab trucks if they were lucky, so it would be unfair for the parents to take some kids and not the others. So only the parents rode in the vehicle and would await the kids at camp, hauling water and packing summer clothes and essentials such as imperishable food items. The majority of the raz didn't have running water or electricity, and no paved roads at all. She said it took a little under 2 days to walk on foot all the way to their sheep camp if they took a shortcut through a canyon. On the first day, the sun is beginning to hang low in the sky, and they decide to make camp. She explained that, back then, there were many hogans scattered across the res that didn't have permanent inhabitants. They were built with the same intentions as the reasoning behind hunters' cabins, to temporarily provide shelter for hunters, or in this case, sheep herders. She said that these Hogans often had corrals for wary shepherds to house their sheep or livestock for the night and continue on their way the next day. Ranchers and locals would upkeep these safe houses sporadically. She remembers clearly being instructed by her mother which Hogans were meant for that purpose, and the ones that had people die in them and were off limits, making them uninhabitable according to Navajo tradition. In place of a door, there was a tattered, moth-eaten blanket hanging from the doorframe. On the inside of the east-facing entrance was a plyboard. It was meant to be leaned up against the doorway and prevent wild animals from entering when occupied. Her older brothers gathered wood and started a fire. The smoke went up the stovepipe in the center of the Hogan. She remembers everyone being fatigued and tired after a long day's march. The dirt floor provided a familiar and comforting smell. They laid their sleeping bags out. The plywood board was put up against the doorway. The brothers found long logs to leverage against the board. Staring at the smoke escaping through the smoke hole, she could see the stars and the dark night sky. The smoke hole was unusually eroded away, making it seem wider than typical smoke holes. The dirt piled on the ceiling of the Hogan was probably eroded by wind and rain, not being maintained regularly, just packed down with fresh mud. The fire was just embers now. As she was drifting off to sleep, she said the sheepdogs that had accompanied them just started going crazy outside, howling and barking. She hears the thudding of a horse running around the Hogan. She is startled by a loud thud up against the board at the entrance, but the brothers had braced the doorway correctly and it doesn't give out. Then she hears a thud on top of the Hogan roof. Dust and debris begins falling from the old-fashioned Hogan roofing under the weight of whatever was walking on top. Her older brother, who was closest to her, whispers in Navajo to close her eyes. She said curiosity got the best of her and she kept them open. Rocks the size of gravel started falling down the stovepipe. The Skinwalker was deliberately throwing heavy rocks down the stovepipe, making loud metal scraping noises as they fell into the Hogan's fireplace. In the dark, her eyes dart from the low glowing embers of the fire, upward, following the deep blackness of the stovepipe and out the smoke hole. There were no glowing eyes, as she would have expected, just the silhouette of the head and torso of the Skinwalker peeking in. She described it as having ears on top of its head like a coyote or dog, but the ears weren't of the canine variety. The ears were elongated and pointy. In the darkness, she said they looked like donkey ears, but were positioned on a coyote-like head. She spent a few moments frozen and staring at the creature, never having seen anything that resembled it in nature. It was unaggressive and only watched them for a while, eventually dismounting from the roof, and the familiar thuds of horse hooves off into the distance. The dogs howled and whined after it, but they never left their post at the sheep corral. This happened last weekend while camping in northern Utah. My friend needed to go to the bathroom, so she walked up a little hill into the woods by another campsite that was empty. As she was walking up, I saw her stop for a minute and she was looking around. I asked if she wanted me to go with her. We're both girls, and she said that she was fine, went to the bathroom and came back. Later that night, we were sitting around the fire with two other girls, and she seemed kind of on edge. I started poking fun at her, as that's how we joke with each other, and she told me that she had seen something just past the tree line as she was walking up to go to the bathroom. She described it as having pale skin, a face that looked like a mix of a human and a canine, and jet black eyes. It was hunched over on all fours, and its back legs looked distorted. She said that she could tell it was tall if it stood on its hind legs, and she could see its spine protruding from its back. She also said that while she was up there, it walked directly in front of her, stopped, and stared at her, so she just ran clean back to the campsite. Her sister says it was most likely a hairless bear or coyote, although bears aren't super common up here, or maybe a wolf with mange. I personally don't know what to think. If anyone could shed some light or lives up here and has seen something similar, please let me know. I was at my friend's house. He lives around a lot of woods in a small town in North Carolina. It was around 2 a.m., and me and my friend were just hopping off of Modern Warfare 2 when we realized we needed to put his dogs up for the night. So we walked them to put them up, but we couldn't find the cat, and we didn't want the dogs getting a hold of it. So we looked around outside until we finally found him on the front porch. So we put him inside and walked out to go back to my friend's house. My friend basically has 2 houses. So we stepped out the door onto the back deck when we hear a cat about 50 yards away in the woods, screeching like it's being attacked. So we assume it's his other cat, so we call his dad. And he's a veteran in the Marines, so he's seen some shit. So he comes out full on Marine mode with his AR-15 and flashlight scanning the woods. And when we hear kind of like a hissing, but not hissing, it almost sounded like something big was out of breath. We got really quiet and listened. It just kept making this blowing noise. But then we noticed it was to the right of us 1 second, and the next it was right in front of us, without making any noise. As anyone would be, my friend's dad was shook from it and fired off a couple rounds into the woods. It got quiet, but then seconds later, the noise resumed. It was moving all over the woods and making no noise at all. Eventually, my friend's dad decided to push up to the wood line with his gun and flashlight. The thing came right in front of him. He described it as being around eye level with him, and he's around 6 feet tall. But what really bothered me is that it wasn't afraid of gunshots or people. Eventually, after not being able to see it, we gave up and called it a night, around 3. The cat didn't come out at all. We began walking back to his house when we heard it come from around 30 feet to our right. Me and my friend and his dad go inside, talking about how fucked the situation was. My friend and I started doing research and couldn't find any type of animal that made that noise. It just messes with my head that some animal or creature has the balls to stand its ground while people are surrounding it and shooting at it. It just made no sense and still doesn't. It's the next night now, around 12:45 a.m., and my friend brought some chicken and placed it on the wood line. We're sitting outside right now, waiting with a spotlight for something. Whatever it is, we want it gone. It just terrorizes the pets he owns. If anyone knows anything about this, please let me know. I'll try to update with a video of the noise if it comes back out tonight. But no promises. I've only had one experience with a skinwalker, and while I didn't see it, a lot of people who write stories about them really hit the nail on the head when it comes to the atmosphere. I didn't see anything, but there was just an oppressive presence all around me. My fight or flight kicked into overdrive, and something primal in my heart of hearts was telling me, you are not supposed to be here. There was also an overpowering scent that was an awful combo of shit, rotting flesh, and copper. So strong I could taste it. Needless to say, I fucking hightailed it out of there, and I've never been back. This was in the Arkansas Ozarks, summer of 2012, I believe. Okay, so long story short, I had a dream where I was in my house, looking out my window, with my boyfriend standing behind me. And every time I looked out the window, I would see my boyfriend. Only, it wasn't my boyfriend. He was walking away from the house and turned back to smile at me. Only his smile was full of evil and malice. I would turn to look at my real boyfriend, who was just as confused as I was, and then back out the window. My not boyfriend was back where he was when I first looked out, and began walking away from the house again, almost as if on a loop. The dream continues a bit and gets a little creepier, but that's the main part in question. When I woke up, I was confused as hell and a bit creeped out. The thought of me dreaming about a skinwalker occurred to me, and I was wondering if it was just my brain being weird and dumb, or if it's possible I was visited by one. I also recognize this could just be my brain or emotions or whatever, and I don't live in what you would think of as Skinwalker territory, as I'm in New England. But I would like to state that I'm in a happy, healthy relationship, so I don't understand why my brain would randomly conjure something like this, which is why I'm posting my question here. Thanks.